Maria Bennett never believed in miracles until her dying baby forced her to search for one. Standing alone in the golden waters of Willow Creek at sunset, the river reaching her chest, she had left her 3-month-old son, who hadn't opened his eyes in 2 days, with her mother. In her desperation, she discovered something that would change everything. Half buried beneath the riverbed stones lay an exquisite statue of the Virgin Mary, its blue and white robes pristine despite years underwater. With trembling hands, Maria lifted the sacred figure from its watery grave, holding it high above the gentle current as water cascaded from its marble face. She pressed the statue against her heart, whispering a desperate prayer as tears mixed with river water on her cheeks. 24 hours later, little Samuel opened his eyes, his fever, broken breathing steady and strong. But was it divine intervention or something else entirely? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Bennett house sat at the end of Maple Street, like a testament to hope deferred. Maria had chosen the pale yellow paint 3 years ago, when they'd finally saved enough for the down payment, and Samuel was still just a dream whispered in late-night prayers. Now at 32, she stood in the nursery doorway, watching her mother-in-law Ruth rock the baby who had stopped fighting for his life 2 days ago. "Any change?" Maria whispered, though she already knew the answer from Ruth's expression. Ruth's weathered hands that had delivered 6 children and buried a husband, continued their gentle motion. "He took a little water an hour ago. Dr. Harrison said that was something." Maria nodded, though something felt like a cruel joke. 3 months ago, Samuel had arrived after 18 hours of labor that nearly claimed them both. The pregnancy had been a miracle itself, coming after 5 years of trying, 3 miscarriages, and 2 rounds of fertility treatments that had drained their savings and nearly broken their marriage. She moved to the rocking chair, her nurse's training automatically cataloguing what she saw. Samuel's breathing remained shallow but steady. His tiny chest rose and fell with the mechanical rhythm that had become their metronome of hope. The fever that had spiked 3 days ago had broken temporarily this morning, only to return with a vengeance by afternoon. Dr. Harrison, who had delivered half the babies in Cedar Falls over the past 20 years, had run every test twice. Blood work came back normal. Chest x-rays showed clear lungs. The pediatric specialist from the county hospital had driven out personally, examined Samuel for 2 hours, and left shaking his head. "Sometimes," he'd said, "babies just fight battles we can't see." Maria reached for the baby blanket draped over the chair's arm. Her grandmother had knitted it in soft blue wool, her arthritic fingers working late into the night during Maria's pregnancy. Each stitch carried decades of family love, patterns passed down through generations of mothers who had faced their own midnight fears. "Maria, honey, you need to eat something." Ruth's voice carried the authority of a woman who had shepherded 5 children through measles, broken bones, and teenage heartbreak. David's bringing home soup from the diner. David, her husband of 7 years, worked double shifts at the county utility office, partly for the overtime pay, but mostly to avoid the helpless weight of watching his son slip away. Last night, she'd found him crying in their car, gripping the steering wheel like it might anchor him to a world that made sense. "I'm not hungry." Maria settled into the window seat, watching the late afternoon light filter through the oak tree they'd planted on their first anniversary. Dr. Harrison said the blood work would be back tomorrow. "The blood work will say the same thing it said yesterday." Ruth's tone held no judgment, only the tired wisdom of someone who had learned that medical science had boundaries. "Some things can't be measured in a laboratory." Maria's nursing degree from Cedar Falls Community College had taught her to trust evidence, protocols, and proven treatments. 3 years in the pediatric wing had shown her the miracles that medicine could accomplish, but it had also shown her the families who went home with empty car seats and rooms that would forever echo with silence. "I keep thinking about Mother," The words slipped out before Maria could stop them. Ruth's own faith had been tested 2 years ago when cancer took Maria's mother with brutal efficiency. 3 months from diagnosis to funeral, barely long enough to say goodbye, Ruth stopped rocking. Your mother would tell you the same thing I'm telling you now. Sometimes we have to look beyond what we can see. You mean pray, Maria didn't mean for it to sound bitter, but faith had become complicated since the funeral. I've been praying, Ruth. I've prayed until my knees are raw and my voice is gone. I've prayed in this room, in the hospital chapel, in our car. I've made bargains with God that would embarrass a desperate gambler. I know, sweetheart, I know. The silence stretched between them, filled only by the soft whisper of Samuel's breathing and the distant sound of David's truck pulling into the driveway. Maria heard his footsteps on the porch, the familiar creak of the third step that he kept meaning to fix. I need some air, Maria said, standing as David's key turned in the lock. Tell him I've gone for a walk. Where? Willow Creek. The words came without thinking, but they felt right. The creek had been her sanctuary as a child, the place she'd escaped to when her parents fought, or when the weight of their expectations felt too heavy. Water had always calmed her, the sound of it moving over stones like a lullaby that never ended. Ruth nodded with understanding. Take your jacket. The evenings are getting cold. Maria kissed Samuel's forehead, inhaling the sweet scent that still clung to him despite everything. His skin felt warm, but not feverish, and for a moment she allowed herself to imagine that tomorrow might bring different news. The drive to Willow Creek took 15 minutes through the rolling hills that surrounded Cedar Falls. The town had been built along the Clearwater River in the 1890s, but Willow Creek remained a smaller, more intimate waterway that wound through farmland and patches of old-growth forest. As a teenager, Maria had brought her nursing textbooks here, studying by the water, while other kids gathered at the mall or the movie theater. The parking area was empty, except for a pickup truck that probably belonged to someone checking cattle in the adjacent pasture. Maria followed the familiar path through the cottonwoods, their leaves already showing hints of the gold that would soon paint the entire valley. The creek moved with lazy contentment, about 3 feet deep in the center and clear enough to see the smooth stones that lined the bottom. Maria had always wondered about those stones, how they'd become so perfectly rounded, what journeys they'd taken before settling here in this peaceful place. She sat on a fallen log and watched the water catch the last rays of sunlight. This was where she'd decided to become a nurse, where she'd accepted David's proposal, where she'd told him about each pregnancy and mourned each loss. The creek had witnessed her joys and sorrows with equal patience. I don't know what else to do, she spoke aloud, not caring if she sounded foolish. Everyone says to have faith, but faith feels like whistling in the dark. I'm a nurse. I deal in facts and measurements and treatments that work, but nothing's working. A fish jumped near the far bank, creating concentric circles that rippled outward until they disappeared. Maria watched the water return to its peaceful flow, envying its ability to heal itself so quickly. The sun had begun to set, painting the sky in shades of coral and gold. Maria knew she should go home, that David would worry if she stayed out too long, but something held her here, a feeling she couldn't name. The air had grown cooler, and the first stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. She stood and walked to the water's edge, remembering how she used to wade here as a child, feeling for minnows with her toes. The water would be cold now, probably close to freezing, but she found herself stepping onto the smooth stones anyway. The creek reached her ankles, then her knees. The cold shocked her system awake, making her breathing sharp and immediate. She kept walking until the water reached her waist, then her chest. The current was stronger here in the deeper channel, pulling gently at her clothes and hair. Please, she whispered to the darkening sky. Please help my baby. I don't care if it makes sense. I don't care if I can explain it. Just please don't let him die. That was when she saw it. Maria drove home with the statue wrapped in her jacket on the passenger seat, her wet clothes clinging to her skin, and her mind racing with questions she couldn't answer. The marble figure seemed to radiate warmth despite having been submerged in the cold creek water for who knew how long. Every few seconds she glanced over at it, half expecting it to have vanished like some fever dream. The house was quiet when she slipped through the back door. David's truck was gone, probably returned to the diner for a second helping of coffee and the kind of conversation that didn't revolve around medical terminology and dwindling hope. Ruth met her in the kitchen, taking in Maria's soaked appearance. With raised eyebrows, but no questions. "How is he?" Maria whispered. "The same. Sleeping now." Ruth's eyes moved to the bundle in Maria's arms. "What do you have there?" Maria hesitated, then unwrapped the statue. Even in the kitchen's fluorescent light, the Virgin Mary's face seemed to glow with serene compassion. The blue and white robes showed no signs of wear despite years underwater, and the delicate features had been carved with extraordinary skill. Ruth's breath caught. "Dear Lord, where did you find this?" "In the creek. It was just sitting there on the bottom like it was waiting." Maria's words sounded foolish even to her own ears, but Ruth's expression showed only wonder. "It's beautiful, ancient by the look of it." Ruth reached out, then stopped her hand inches from the marble. "May I?" Maria nodded and watched as Ruth's weathered fingers traced the statue's face with the reverence of someone who had spent 70 years in church pews. "There's something about it," Ruth murmured, "something special." They climbed the stairs together, Maria carrying the statue like a precious child. Samuel's room was bathed in the soft glow of his nightlight, and for a moment, nothing seemed changed. Then Maria saw it, the slight difference in his breathing, deeper and more rhythmic than it had been in days. She placed the statue on the dresser beside his crib and knelt beside him. His skin felt cooler, the flush of fever fading from his cheeks. As she watched, his eyelids fluttered. "Ruth," she whispered urgently. Samuel's eyes opened for the first time in 48 hours. Not the glassy, unfocused stare of illness, but clear and alert. He turned his head toward Maria's voice and made a soft sound that might have been contentment. Ruth gasped and reached for the phone. "I'm calling Dr. Harrison. It's almost midnight. I don't care what time it is." Dr. Harrison arrived 20 minutes later, his grey hair disheveled and his medical bag in hand. He'd delivered Samuel and had been the family physician for both Maria and David since they'd married. Behind his wire-rimmed glasses, his eyes held the tired compassion of someone who had shared too many midnight vigils with desperate families. "Let's see what we have here," he said, setting his stethoscope against Samuel's chest. The baby tracked. The movement with bright eyes, even reaching for the stethoscope with tiny fingers that hadn't shown such coordination in days. Dr. Harrison listened for a long moment, then checked Samuel's temperature, reflexes, and color. His examination grew more thorough as the minutes passed, his expression shifting from concern to confusion to something approaching amazement. "His fever is completely gone," he said finally. "Temperature is normal. Heart rate and respiration are perfect. Color is excellent." He looked up at Maria. "What happened? What changed?" Maria glanced at the statue, then back at the doctor. "I don't know. He was like this when I checked on him an hour ago." "Sometimes these things turn around quickly in babies," Dr. Harrison said, but his tone suggested he didn't quite believe. His own words, "We'll want to monitor him closely, run some tests tomorrow to make sure, but this is—" He shook his head. "This is remarkable." David arrived home as Dr. Harrison was leaving. He took the stairs 2 at a time, his face pale with the assumption that a midnight medical visit meant the worst possible news. Instead, he found Maria holding Samuel, who was nursing with an appetite that had been absent for days. "What's going on?" David's voice carried 6 months of accumulated fear. "He's better," Maria said simply. "Dr. Harrison says his fever broke. Completely. Everything's normal." David stared at his son, as if seeing him for the first time. Samuel's eyes were bright and focused, tracking his father's movements with the awareness that had been missing during his illness. When David offered his finger, Samuel grasped it with surprising strength. But how? Harrison said yesterday that he'd never seen anything like this, that we should prepare ourselves for... David's voice broke. I don't know how, Maria said. Sometimes things just change. David's engineer's mind demanded explanations, cause and effect, logical progressions from problem to solution. He'd spent the past week researching Samuel's symptoms online, calling specialists, demanding second opinions. The idea that his son could simply get better overnight violated everything he understood about how the world worked. Did Harrison give him something? A new treatment? No. Nothing changed except Maria's eyes moved to the statue, which seemed to watch the family reunion with marble serenity. David followed her gaze. What is that? Something I found today. At the creek. You found a statue in Willow Creek? David's tone suggested he thought the stress had finally broken something in his wife's mind. Ruth spoke from the doorway. It's beautiful, isn't it? There's something peaceful about it. David approached the dresser cautiously, as if the statue might bite. It looks old. Probably worth something. Where exactly did you find it? In the water. About 4 feet down, sitting on the bottom, like someone had placed it there carefully. That doesn't make sense. Who would throw away something like this? And how did it stay so clean underwater? Maria didn't have answers that would satisfy David's logical mind. She only knew that Samuel was better, that the fever had broken completely, and that her prayers in the creek had been followed by the most important night of their lives. Over the following hours, Samuel continued to strengthen. He nursed eagerly. His color improved from the pale gray of illness to healthy pink, and his movements showed the vigor of a normal 3-month-old. By morning, it was as if the past week of crisis had been erased. Dr. Harrison returned with his nurse to draw blood and run tests. The results, when they came back that afternoon, showed no trace of infection, no elevated white cell counts, no indicators of the mysterious illness that had brought Samuel to death's door. It's impossible, Dr. Harrison told them privately. Yesterday's blood work showed clear signs of systemic infection. Today, everything is perfectly normal. I've never seen a turnaround this complete, this fast. But he's healthy now? David pressed. Completely healthy? By every measure I can. Take, yes. But I want to see him again next week, and I think we should consider some additional testing with the pediatric specialists. After Dr. Harrison left, David sat in the nursery holding Samuel while Maria watched from the doorway. The statue remained. On the dresser, its presence both comforting and inexplicable. I don't understand what happened, David said quietly, but I'm grateful. Maria nodded, fingering the statue's blue robes. She didn't understand either, but understanding felt less important than the miracle sleeping peacefully in her husband's arms. The morning light streaming through St. Catherine's stained glass windows cast rainbow patterns across the worn wooden pews. Maria sat in the back row, the Virgin Mary statue carefully wrapped in a soft cloth beside her. She'd been coming here since childhood, but today the familiar space felt different, charged with possibilities she'd never considered before. Father Benedict emerged from the sacristy, his black cassock rustling softly as he prepared for morning. Mass. At 73, he moved with the deliberate care of age, but his mind remained sharp as the day he'd arrived in Cedar Falls 40 years ago. His Irish accent had softened over the decades, but still colored his words with the music of his homeland. Maria Bennett, he said, recognizing her despite the early hour. How is little Samuel? I heard he was quite ill. He's much better, Father. Actually, that's why I'm here. I need to ask you about something. Father Benedict's weathered face showed immediate concern. Of course, child. What's troubling you? Maria unwrapped the statue, placing it carefully on the pew between them. Father Benedict's expression shifted to one of recognition and wonder. Mother of God, he whispered, then caught himself. Forgive me. Where did you find this? In Willow Creek. The night Samuel's fever broke. Maria's words came in a rush. I know how it sounds, but I think... I think this statue might have something to do with his recovery. Father Benedict lifted the statue with hands that had consecrated thousands of masses and blessed countless parishioners through birth, marriage, and death. His fingers traced the delicate carving with the expertise of someone who had spent a lifetime surrounded by religious art. This is remarkable craftsmanship. 19th century, I'd guess, possibly earlier. The style suggests European origin, though I've seen similar work from skilled American craftsmen of that period. He turned the statue over, examining the base. There's an inscription here, very faint. Maria leaned closer. What does it say? It's in Latin. Pro infantibus qui mortui sunt, for the children who have died. Father Benedict's voice grew thoughtful. There's more. But I need my reading glasses to make it out clearly. They moved to his office, where Father Benedict retrieved a magnifying glass from his desk drawer. Under the enhanced light, more of the inscription became visible. Blessed for the protection of innocence, dedicated in memory of the souls lost to the Great Flood, 1952. The rest is too worn to read clearly, but there's a date and what might be initials. Maria felt a chill that had nothing to do with the church's morning coolness. Father, what do you know about a flood in 1952? Before my time here. But I've heard the stories. Terrible spring flooding that year. The old St. Mary's Chapel was destroyed along with several homes. 3 families lost everything, including... He paused, his expression growing somber. Several children were lost. Bodies never recovered. There was a chapel? Where? Where Willow Creek bends east, about 2 miles upstream from where the young people swim these days. Nothing left of it now but some foundation stones, if even those remain. Father Benedict set the statue on his desk and folded his hands. Maria, tell me exactly what happened the night Samuel recovered. Maria told him everything. Her desperation, the prayer by the creek, finding the statue beneath the water, Samuel's miraculous turnaround. Father Benedict listened without interruption, his expression growing more thoughtful with each detail. The church has protocols for investigating claimed miracles, he said when she finished. Medical documentation, witness testimony, elimination of natural explanations. It's a lengthy process, and frankly, most claims don't meet the stringent requirements. I'm not trying to claim anything officially. I just want to understand what happened, and that's wise. The church is rightly cautious about supernatural claims, but he gestured toward the statue. This statue was clearly blessed for a specific purpose, and its discovery coinciding with your son's recovery is, at the very least, remarkable. Maria felt both relief and frustration. Part of her had hoped for immediate answers, definitive explanations that would make sense of the inexplicable. Instead, she found more questions. What should I do with it? That depends on what you believe happened. Father Benedict's eyes were kind, but direct. If you believe this statue played a role in Samuel's healing, then perhaps it's meant to stay with your family. If you're uncertain, we could research its history, try to determine where it originally belonged. I'd like to know more about its history. Then I suggest you speak with Mrs. Henderson at the library. She's the unofficial keeper of Cedar Falls memory, and if anyone knows about the old chapel and the families affected by the flood, it would be her. Maria rewrapped the statue, feeling the weight of responsibility that came with carrying something potentially sacred. As she prepared to leave, Father Benedict placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. Maria, whether this was divine intervention or remarkable coincidence, your son is healthy. Don't let the mystery overshadow the blessing. The drive home took her past the turnoff to Willow Creek. On impulse, she pulled over and walked to the spot where she'd found the statue. In daylight, the creek looked ordinary, pretty but unremarkable. No sign remained of her midnight discovery, except a depression in the sandy bottom where the statue had rested. She knelt beside the water and pulled out the antique rosary Father Benedict had given her. Not the plastic ones distributed to children, but carved wooden beads worn smooth by decades of faithful fingers. The familiar prayers felt different now, weighted with new meaning and possibility. At home, she found David in the nursery, holding Samuel while reviewing engineering reports from work. The baby was alert and engaged, grasping at the papers with the curiosity that had been absent during his illness. "Where did you go?" David asked, without looking up from his calculations. "St. Catherine's. I wanted to ask Father Benedict about the statue." David's jaw tightened slightly. Since Samuel's recovery, he'd been struggling with the implications of events he couldn't explain scientifically. His engineer's mind demanded logical sequences, and overnight miraculous healings didn't fit into any framework he understood. "What did he say?" "That it's very old, probably blessed for a specific purpose. He thinks it might have belonged to a chapel that was destroyed in a flood in 1952. So it has historical value. We should probably donate it to a museum or back to the church." Maria felt a protective surge that surprised her. "Maybe, but what if it's meant to stay with us?" "Meant by whom?" David's tone carried the edge of a man pushed beyond his comfort zone. "Maria, Samuel got better. That's wonderful, miraculous even in the way doctors use that word. But statues don't heal people. Medicine does, time does, the human body's amazing ability to fight infection does." "Then explain why his recovery was so sudden. Dr. Harrison said he'd never seen anything like it. I can't explain it. That doesn't mean I have to accept supernatural explanations." Ruth appeared in the doorway, drawn by the tension in their voices. "Perhaps," she said quietly, "you don't need to explain everything. Perhaps you just need to be grateful." David looked at his mother, then at Maria, then at Samuel, who was watching the conversation with the bright attention of a healthy baby. "I am grateful, more grateful than I know how to express. I just don't want us to lose ourselves in magical thinking." "Is faith magical thinking?" Ruth asked. "Faith is different. Faith is about hope and community, and finding meaning in difficult times. This is about," David gestured toward the statue, "this is about believing that marble statues can cure sick children." Maria set the statue on the dresser where it had spent the previous night. In the afternoon light streaming through the nursery window, it seemed to glow within a warmth. "I don't know what I believe," she said honestly, "but Samuel is healthy, and that's enough for now." That evening, as she prepared Samuel for bed, Maria noticed something she'd missed before. The baby's eyes seemed to track the statue's position, and when she moved it to dust the dresser, his gaze followed. When she placed it back, he made the soft cooing sound that had become his expression of contentment. She tested it twice more, moving the statue to different positions around the room. Each time, Samuel's eyes found it immediately, as if drawn by some invisible connection. David, watching from the doorway, saw it too. His expression remained skeptical, but she noticed. He didn't offer any alternative explanations. The Cedar Falls Public Library occupied a converted Victorian mansion on Main Street, its tall windows and wraparound porch giving it the appearance of a grand home rather than a repository of knowledge. Mrs. Henderson had ruled its stacks for 37 years, transforming what had once been a modest collection into the region's most comprehensive archive of local history. Maria found her in the genealogy section, silver hair pinned in a neat bun, helping a young man trace his family tree back to the original homesteaders. At 68, Mrs. Henderson moved with the purposeful efficiency of someone who had spent decades matching people with exactly the information they needed. "Maria Bennett," she said warmly when the young man left with a stack of photocopied documents. "I heard little Samuel was feeling much better. Such wonderful news." "Thank you, Mrs. Henderson. Actually, that's related to why I'm here. I'm hoping you can help me research something I found." Maria unwrapped the statue, setting it carefully on the reading table. Mrs. Henderson's eyes widened with immediate recognition. "Oh, my goodness. Where on earth did you find this? You recognize it?" "I believe so. Give me just a moment." Mrs. Henderson disappeared into the back room, returning with a leather-bound volume titled Cedar Falls, A Century of Faith. She flipped through pages yellowed with age until she found what she was looking for. "Here," she said, pointing to a black and white photograph. "This was taken inside St. Mary's Chapel in 1951, just before the flood. Look there, on the altar." Maria leaned closer. The photograph showed a small wooden chapel filled with families dressed in their Sunday best. Behind the altar, clearly visible despite the photograph's age, stood an identical statue of the Virgin Mary. "That's the same statue?" "It certainly appears to be." St. Mary's was Cedar Falls' first Catholic church, built in 1887 by Irish immigrants who worked the mines up in Copper Canyon. When St. Catherine's was built in 1923, St. Mary's became a chapel for special occasions: baptisms, weddings, funeral masses for old-timers who'd been married there. Mrs. Henderson turned several pages, revealing more photographs and newspaper clippings. The 1952 flood was devastating. 3 days of unprecedented rainfall combined with rapid snowmelt from an early warm spell. The Clearwater River rose 12 feet above flood stage, and Willow Creek became a raging torrent. Maria studied a newspaper photograph showing the aftermath. Where peaceful farmland should have been, a landscape of mud, debris, and destruction stretched toward the horizon. Trees had been stripped of their bark, buildings reduced to scattered lumber, and the creek bed carved into a new channel. The chapel was completely destroyed, swept away like it had never existed. Father O'Brien managed to save the parish records, and some of the larger furnishings, but smaller items, candlesticks, statues, prayer books, were lost to the flood. 3 families lost their homes as well. Mrs. Henderson's voice grew somber. The Clearys, the Sullivans, and the Robinsons. 14 people in total, including 5 children under the age of 10. Most of the adults' bodies were recovered downstream, but the children... She shook her head. The current was too strong, the debris too thick. Their bodies were never found. Maria felt a chill reading the names listed in the old newspaper. Mary Cleary, age 6. James Sullivan, age 4. Baby Sarah Robinson, only 8 months old. 2 other Sullivan children, Anna's children, according to the article. "Anna Sullivan," Maria read aloud. "It says here she was pregnant when the flood hit." "Yes, poor woman. Lost her husband Patrick and 2 young ones, but somehow survived herself. The baby was born several months later, a daughter, I believe." Anna moved away after that, couldn't bear to stay in Cedar Falls with so many memories. "Do you know where she went?" Mrs. Henderson consulted another volume. "Let me see. There's a marriage record here from 1954. Anna Sullivan married a man named Fletcher from over in Millerville. Started fresh with a new name and a new life, which was probably the wisest thing she could do. Fletcher, Maria's maiden name, was Fletcher, her grandmother's maiden name. Mrs. Henderson, do you have any more specific information about Anna Fletcher, maiden name Sullivan?" "I might. We have some county records from that period." "Why do you ask?" Maria's mind raced with connections she didn't fully understand. "I think she might have been my great-grandmother." Mrs. Henderson's eyebrows rose. "That would be remarkable. Let me check our genealogy files." 20 minutes later, they had spread 3 generations of records across the reading table. The trail was clear once they knew what to look for. Anna Sullivan had indeed married William Fletcher in 1954. Their daughter Margaret had married John Allen in 1975. Margaret Allen was Maria's grandmother. "So Anna Sullivan was your great-grandmother," Mrs. Henderson confirmed. "Which means the children who died in the flood were your great-aunts and great-uncle." Maria stared at the newspaper photograph showing the chapel's destruction. "And this statue belonged to their family's church." "Very likely. Each family in the congregation contributed to the chapel's furnishings. The Sullivans were among the most devout. Patrick served as an altar server, and Anna organized the women's prayer circle." Mrs. Henderson opened another book, this one filled with handwritten notes and pressed flowers. This was Anna's prayer book, donated by the Fletcher family when William died in 1978. "Look here." The page showed a hand-drawn sketch of the Virgin Mary statue, surrounded by careful script in faded ink. Blessed by Father O'Brien, for the protection of innocence, dedicated in memory of our parish children, May 15th, 1952. Below that, indifferent. Handwriting, for all the babies yet to come, that they might know God's protection where mine could not reach. Maria's hands trembled as she read the inscription. She wrote this after the flood, after losing her own children, yes. Anna believed deeply in the power of prayer to protect future generations. According to family stories, she prayed daily for children she would never meet, grandchildren and great-grandchildren who might face their own dangers. The weight of discovery settled over Maria like a blanket. Her great-grandmother had lost 2 children to the flood, had blessed this same statue for the protection of future innocence, and had prayed specifically for babies yet to come. Now, 3 generations later, that same statue had been present for Samuel's miraculous recovery. Mrs. Henderson, is there any way to visit the site where the chapel stood? Certainly. It's about 2 miles upstream from the main swimming area at Willow Creek. There's not much to see. Some foundation stones, perhaps a few pieces of the original altar. But the Fletcher family, your family, still owns the land. William never sold it, said it was too sacred to develop. Maria gathered the photocopied documents and photographs Mrs. Henderson had prepared. Thank you. This helps explain so much. Does it? Or does it make things more mysterious? Driving home, Maria couldn't shake the feeling that invisible threads were weaving together across decades. Anna Sullivan had lost her children to Willow Creek's flood, had blessed the Virgin Mary statue for the protection of future innocence, and had prayed for generations she would never meet. Now that same statue had emerged from the creek's waters. At the exact moment, Maria's own child faced mortal danger. Coincidence seemed increasingly inadequate to explain the connections. But if not coincidence, then what? Divine providence, answered prayer that had waited 70 years for fulfillment. The idea seemed both impossible and undeniable. At home, she found David assembling a new crib mobile while Samuel watched from his bouncy seat. The baby's alert attention and vigorous movements continued to amaze everyone who had seen him during his illness. Dr. Harrison's follow-up examination that morning had confirmed what they already knew. Samuel was not just healthy, but thriving beyond normal developmental expectations. How was your research? David asked, not looking up from the mobile's intricate assembly. Interesting. The statue belonged to a chapel that was destroyed in the 1952 flood. And David, I think Anna Sullivan, the woman who owned it, was my great-grandmother. David's, hands stilled. Your great-grandmother. She lost 2 children in the flood, but survived to have another daughter. That daughter was my grandmother Margaret. So this statue has been in your family for 70 years. In a way. It belonged to her church, and she specifically blessed it for the protection of children after losing her own to the flood. David sat back on his heels, studying the statue that had taken up permanent residence on Samuel's dresser. That's quite a coincidence. Is it? Or is it something else? For the first time since Samuel's recovery, David didn't immediately dismiss the possibility of something beyond coincidence. I don't know what it is, he said finally, but I'm beginning to think I don't need to know. Ruth insisted on bringing her gardening knee pads for the expedition to the old chapel site. At 70, she moved with the careful deliberation of someone who had learned to respect her body's limitations, but her curiosity about Anna Sullivan's story had overcome any concerns about trampling through overgrown creek bottom. My own grandmother used to tell stories about the flood, Ruth said, as they walked along the creek bank toward the bend where the chapel had stood. She was just a child then, but she remembered the sound of it, like a freight train coming through the valley. Maria carried a canvas bag containing the statue, wrapped carefully in towels. She'd felt compelled to bring it to the site where it had originally served, though she couldn't articulate exactly why. Something about completing A circle that had been broken 70 years ago. There, Ruth pointed ahead to where the creek curved sharply eastward. Those flat stones weren't shaped by water. That's human work. The foundation remnants were more extensive than Maria had expected. Rectangular stones fitted together with careful precision marked the outline of a building perhaps 30 feet long and 20 feet wide. Smaller stones indicated where an altar had stood, facing west toward what would have been the chapel's entrance. They waded into the deeper water where the altar stones lay partially submerged. Ruth's sharp eyes caught details that Maria might have missed. The careful craftsmanship of corner joints, the smooth wear patterns that suggested decades of faithful use, the iron bolts that had once secured wooden furnishings. "Help me with this," Ruth said, kneeling beside a large rectangular stone. Together, they worked it free from the sandy bottom, revealing carved letters worn smooth but still readable. St. Mary's Chapel, 1887. Faith makes all things possible. Maria felt the weight of standing where her great-grandmother had prayed, where Anna Sullivan had lost everything and somehow found the strength to bless future generations. The creek moved around them with the same gentle persistence it had shown for centuries, but beneath that peaceful surface lay the memory of terrible destruction. "Mrs. Henderson said 3 families were lost here," Maria said, running her fingers over the carved inscription. 14 souls, Ruth replied. "I've heard the stories my whole life. The Clearys lived just upstream, had a small farm and raised sheep. Good people, always helped their neighbors. The Robinsons ran the general store in town, never turned away anyone who couldn't pay. And the Sullivans, Patrick worked the mines, but spent every free moment here at the chapel, maintaining the building, tending the grounds. They moved systematically through the submerged foundation, Ruth's knowledge of old building techniques helping them identify where different elements had stood. The font near the entrance, the wooden pews arranged in careful rows, the small alcove where the statue would have rested when not displayed on the altar. "Ruth, look at this." Maria had worked a smaller stone, free from the creek bed. Unlike the others, this one bore a more recent inscription. A.S. 1952, for those who come after. Anna Sullivan, Ruth breathed. She came back here after the flood. The implications struck Maria like a physical blow. Anna had returned to this place of devastating loss, had somehow managed to place a memorial stone among the ruins of the chapel where her children had died. The courage that must have required, the faith to look beyond her own grief toward future generations seemed almost superhuman. "There's something else," Ruth said quietly. She was standing near what had been the chapel's center, looking down into water so clear they could see every pebble on the bottom. These weren't shaped by the flood. Maria joined her and saw what Ruth had discovered. A careful arrangement of stones forming a circle about 4 feet across. Within the circle, someone had placed objects that time and water had preserved. A child's wooden toy, a woman's prayer book sealed in what appeared to be oiled cloth, a small metal cross, a memorial. Maria whispered. "Anna made this. Had to. She came back here after losing everything and created a shrine for her children." They stood in silence, ankle-deep in water that had taken so much, but had also preserved this testament to love and faith. Maria unwrapped the Virgin Mary statue, holding it above the memorial circle as she had that first night in the creek. The statue seemed to belong here, to complete something that had been broken for 7 decades. But as Maria knelt to place it among the other memorial objects, Ruth stopped her. "No, dear, it doesn't belong here anymore. But this is where it came from, where Anna blessed it. Anna blessed it for the children who would come after, not for the ones she'd already lost. You found it when Samuel needed it most. That's not coincidence. That's answered prayer." A splash behind them announced the arrival of someone else. They turned to see a man emerging from the downstream brush, wearing waterproof boots and carrying a metal detector. Tall and lean with graying hair, he moved with the confident gait of someone who had spent considerable time exploring the outdoors. "Excuse me," he called. I hope I'm not intruding. I'm William Porter, local historian. I've been documenting flood sites throughout the valley. Ruth stood, brushing water from her hands. I'm Ruth Bennett, and this is my daughter-in-law, Maria. We're researching Maria's family connection to this site. William's eyes lit with professional interest. Family connection? Are you related to one of the flood families? Anna Sullivan was my great-grandmother, Maria said, still holding the statue. William's expression shifted to one of recognition and excitement. Anna Sullivan? My research indicates she was one of the most remarkable survivors of the 1952 flood. Lost her husband and 2 children, but somehow managed to... He stopped, staring at the statue in Maria's hands. Good Lord, where did you find that? In the creek, about 2 miles downstream from here. Why? Because I've been looking for it for 15 years. William waded closer, his metal detector forgotten. That statue was mentioned in every contemporary account of the chapel's destruction. Father O'Brien specifically noted its loss in his report to the diocese, said it had been specially blessed and was considered the chapel's most sacred object. Maria felt the familiar chill that accompanied each new revelation about the statue's significance. What made it so special? According to the church records, it was carved by Patrick Sullivan himself, your great-great-grandfather. He was a stone mason before he went to work in the mines, and he spent 3 years creating that statue as a gift for the chapel. It was blessed in a special ceremony in 1890, shortly after his first child was born. The statue in Maria's hands seemed to grow heavier with this new knowledge. Not only had it belonged to her family's church, but it had been created by her own ancestor as an offering of thanksgiving for new life. There's more, William continued. Anna Sullivan's diary survived the flood. It's in the County Historical Society's collection. She wrote extensively about the statue after Patrick and the children died. She believed it held protective power specifically for infants and expectant mothers. Ruth's hand found Maria's shoulder. Dear, you need to hear this. According to her diary, Anna visited this site regularly for 2 years after the flood. She would wade into the creek and pray for what she called the babies yet to come. She specifically asked that the statue be found by someone who needed its protection for their own child. Maria's legs felt weak. She prayed for me, for Samuel. She prayed for any mother who might face what she had faced. And according to her final diary entry, she received some kind of assurance that her prayers would be answered when the time was right. William gestured toward the memorial circle at their feet. This shrine she created, it wasn't just for her lost children. It was a place of intercession for future generations. She believed the statue would surface when God intended it to serve its purpose again. The 3 of them stood in the flowing water, surrounded by the remnants of faith destroyed and renewed. Maria understood now why she had felt compelled to bring the statue back to this place, not to leave it behind, but to acknowledge the chain of prayer and protection that connected her to Anna Sullivan across 70 years. William, what happened to Anna after she left Cedar Falls? She married a good man named Fletcher, moved to Millerville, and had 7 more children. Lived to be 93, surrounded by grandchildren and great-grandchildren. By all accounts, she found peace after her tragedy, and she never spoke of the statue again. Only once, according to family stories passed down through the Fletcher line. On her deathbed, she told her youngest daughter that someday the Virgin Mary would rise from Willow Creek to save another mother's child. Her daughter thought it was fever talking, but Anna insisted it would happen exactly as she'd prayed. Maria pressed the statue against her chest, feeling the same inexplicable warmth she'd experienced that first night. The marble seemed to pulse, with something beyond physical presence, with decades of faithful prayer, with the desperate love of a mother who had lost everything but never lost hope. We should go, Ruth said gently. Samuel will be waking from his nap soon. As they prepared to leave the chapel site, William made one final observation. Maria, the diary mentions that Anna specifically prayed for the statue to be found by a woman who understood loss. She believed that only someone who had faced the possibility of losing a child could fully appreciate the miracle of saving one. Walking back along the creek bank, Maria reflected on the weight of inherited grace. Anna Sullivan had transformed her tragedy into intercession, her loss into a bridge of protection spanning 3 generations. The statue hadn't just healed Samuel. It had connected Maria to a legacy of faith she never knew existed. Ruth, do you think David will understand all this? I think David is beginning to understand that some things don't need explaining, only accepting. Ruth's smile carried the wisdom of someone who had watched skepticism give way to wonder many times over 7 decades. Your husband loves Samuel, and he loves you. That's enough foundation for any faith to grow on. They reached the car as the afternoon sun began to slant low through the cottonwoods. Maria took one last look back toward the chapel site, where stones that had witnessed both destruction and resurrection continued their patient wait beneath the flowing water. Tomorrow she would share these discoveries with David, would help him understand that their family's miracle was part of a much larger story of love persisting across time. But tonight she would simply hold her healthy son and whisper thanks to a great-grandmother she had never met, whose prayers had reached across 70 years to save another mother's heart from breaking. David found the historical documents spread across their kitchen table when he came home from work, his engineering reports forgotten as he studied the photocopied newspaper articles, genealogy charts, and photographs that mapped 3 generations of connection between his family and the mysterious statue. "You've been busy," he said, his tone carefully neutral as Maria fed Samuel in the breakfast nook. The baby's appetite continued to amaze everyone. He had gained 2 pounds since his recovery and was now ahead of the growth curve for his age. William Porter, the historian Ruth and I met today, gave me copies of Anna Sullivan's diary entries. "David, you need to read this." Maria handed him a photocopied page covered in careful 19th century script. David's engineering background had given him experience with technical documentation, but this handwriting required patience to decipher. "May 20th, 1952, he read aloud. "Return to the chapel ruins today with the statue Patrick carved for our Mary's baptism. The water has receded enough to reach the altar stones. I placed the Blessed Mother where she belongs and prayed that she might watch over children yet to be born, children who might face the darkness that took my own." David set the page down and picked up another. "The fever dreams continue, but they are not dreams of sorrow. I see a young woman standing in the creek where my Patrick died, holding a baby who breathes with life instead of struggle. She finds the statue as I pray she will, and the protection I could not give my children, she receives for hers. David, she saw me. 70 years ago, Anna Sullivan had visions of me finding the statue and Samuel being healed." David's rational mind recoiled from the implications. Dreams and visions belonged in the realm of superstition, not in the carefully ordered world where problems had solutions and effects, followed causes in logical sequence. But the evidence spread before him: birth certificates, death records, witness testimonies, historical documentation, formed a chain of proof that his skepticism couldn't easily break. "People in grief often have vivid dreams," he said finally. "Trauma can create all kinds of psychological experiences that feel prophetic in retrospect. What about the genealogy? What about the fact that I'm Anna's great-granddaughter? What about Samuel's recovery happening the exact night I found the statue she blessed for the protection of future children?" David walked to the window, looking out at the oak tree where he'd planned to hang a swing for Samuel's first birthday. "I don't know how to explain the coincidences. But Maria, if we start believing that marble statues have healing powers, where does it end? Do we stop trusting medicine? Do we pray instead of seeking treatment when Samuel gets sick again? I'm not suggesting we abandon medical care. I'm saying maybe there are some things that work alongside medicine, things that don't contradict science but operate in spaces science doesn't fully understand. Ruth appeared in the doorway, having heard their voices grow tense. "David, may I say something?" "Of course, Mom." Ruth settled into the chair across from him, her movements deliberate with the care of age. "When you were Samuel's age, you had pneumonia. This was 1987, before all the modern treatments available now. Dr. Peterson did everything medical knowledge recommended, but you weren't responding. For 3 days, your father and I took turns holding you, watching you struggle to breathe." David had heard fragments of this story before, but never the details. "What happened?" "Your grandmother arrived from Kansas City with her prayer circle. 8 women who had been meeting weekly for 40 years. They spent the night in your nursery, taking turns holding you and praying. By morning, your fever had broken and your breathing was clear." "Mom, that's a coincidence, perhaps. But David, you recovered completely and never had serious respiratory problems again." Your father, practical as he was, always credited both Dr. Peterson's treatment and your grandmother's prayers. He said some problems need both kinds of help. David felt the weight of family history pressing against his carefully constructed worldview. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" "Because you needed to come to your own understanding about faith. But now, watching you struggle with Samuel's healing, I think you're fighting the same battle your father fought, between wanting logical explanations and being grateful for inexplicable blessings." Maria joined them at the table, Samuel content in her arms. "David, I'm not asking you to believe in miracles. I'm asking you to consider that maybe we don't understand everything about how healing works, how prayer works, how love works across time. And what if people find out? What if this story gets around town and suddenly everyone thinks we're claiming divine intervention?" "I have professional responsibilities, Maria. Clients who trust my judgment about complex engineering projects. How does it look if I'm endorsing supernatural explanations for things that have rational causes?" What rational cause explains Samuel's recovery? David had no answer that satisfied even his own need for logic. Dr. Harrison's follow-up tests continued to show not just normal results, but exceptional health markers. Samuel's development was accelerating beyond typical milestones, as if the mysterious illness had been replaced by equally mysterious vitality. "I need some air," David said, standing abruptly. "This is all happening too fast." He walked to Willow Creek, following the same path Maria had taken that desperate night too. Weeks ago, the familiar landscape looked different now, charged with significance he couldn't dismiss but couldn't fully accept. Every stone, every bend in the water, every shadow might conceal mysteries that challenged everything he thought he knew about how the world worked. At the spot where Maria had found the statue, David knelt and searched the creek bottom. His engineering training had taught him to examine foundations, to understand how structures were built and why they sometimes failed. But what foundation could support faith in answered prayers that spanned 70 years? He returned home to find Maria and Ruth putting Samuel to bed. The statue occupied its place on the dresser, and Samuel's eyes tracked to it automatically as they had every night since his recovery. David watched his son's face, noting the inexplicable peace that seemed to radiate from the baby whenever. The statue was near. "Maria, I can't explain what happened to Samuel, and I can't explain the connections you've discovered about your family and that statue. But I also can't ignore that our son is healthy and thriving." "That's enough for now," Maria said, adjusting Samuel's blanket. "We don't need to solve every mystery tonight." David touched the statue's base, feeling the smooth marble that had somehow survived 7 decades underwater without damage. If this thing has been protecting children for 70 years, I suppose it can handle protecting one more. It wasn't a declaration of faith, but it was acceptance of something beyond his understanding. As they turned off the nursery light, leaving only the soft glow that illuminated the Virgin Mary's serene face, David found himself hoping that whatever force had brought the statue into their lives would continue to watch over his family. Outside, the wind moved through the oak tree's branches, creating shadows that danced across the nursery window like guardian spirits keeping vigil through the night. William Porter's phone call came at 7 in the morning, his voice crackling with excitement over the connection. "Maria, I found something extraordinary in the County Historical Society's archives. Can you meet me at the library this morning?" An hour later, Maria sat across from William at Mrs. Henderson's research table, where a leather-bound diary lay open between them. The pages showed the careful handwriting of someone for whom written words were precious, every letter formed with deliberate care. "This is Anna Sullivan's complete diary from 1952 through 1954, William explained. The Historical Society acquired it when the Fletcher family donated William's papers in 1978, but no one had examined it thoroughly until yesterday. Mrs. Henderson joined them, her librarian's instincts drawn to the discovery of unknown historical documents. "William called me last night. What he's found changes everything we thought we knew about Anna Sullivan's story." Maria leaned forward as William opened the diary to a page marked with a blue ribbon. "This entry is dated September 15th, 1952, 4 months after the flood. Listen to this. The dreams have grown clearer. I see her face now, the woman who will find Patrick's statue. She has my Margaret's eyes and my own stubborn chin. She stands in the creek where my children died, but she holds life instead of death, hope instead of sorrow. She's describing me," Maria whispered. "It gets more specific." William turned several pages. "October 3rd, 1952. The vision shows me her name now, Maria, like the Blessed Mother whose statue Patrick carved. She will be Margaret's granddaughter, born in a year of great change for the nation. When old certainties crumble, a new faith must grow." Mrs. Henderson checked her genealogy notes. "Maria, what year were you born?" 1991. 1991 was indeed a year of great change. The Soviet Union collapsed, the Gulf War ended, the Internet began connecting the world. Anna's description of old certainties crumbling and new faith growing fits remarkably well. William continued reading. "November 12th, 1952. I have seen the child she will save. A boy born in difficult circumstances, fighting for life as my own children fought. But where mine were taken, hers will be spared. The statue will rise from the water at the moment of her greatest need, carrying with it the accumulated prayers of all the mothers who have ever lost children to circumstances beyond their control." Maria felt the familiar chill that accompanied each new revelation about the statue's significance. Anna Sullivan hadn't just blessed the statue for future protection, she had received specific visions about how that protection would unfold. "There's more," William said, his voice growing hushed with awe. "January 8th, 1953. Margaret grows strong within me, and I know she carries the bloodline that will lead to Maria. Each generation will face its own trials, but each will also carry forward the faith that transforms sorrow into blessing. Margaret will have a daughter who struggles to conceive, but eventually bears a daughter who becomes a healer of children. That daughter will be Maria, a healer of children, my nursing career." Mrs. Henderson had been taking notes as William read. "Maria, this diary essentially provides a 3-generation prophecy about your family line. Anna predicted your grandmother. Margaret, your mother's struggles with fertility, your career in pediatric nursing, and Samuel's near-death experience." William turned to the diary's final entries. But the most remarkable passage is from March 19th, 1954, just days before Anna left Cedar Falls forever. "I have placed the statue in the deepest pool below the chapel ruins, wrapped in oiled cloth, and weighted with stones Patrick used to build our first home. The Blessed Mother will rest there until Maria needs her, protected by the same waters that took my children, but will give life to hers. I have seen the exact spot where she will find it, the exact words she will pray, the exact moment when heaven touches earth through a mother's desperate love." Maria's hands trembled as the implications sank in. Anna didn't lose the statue. In the flood, she placed it there deliberately, in the exact spot where I found it 70 years later. She created what we might call a temporal prayer, William said. A blessing designed to activate at a specific moment in the future when the conditions she foresaw came to pass. Mrs. Henderson consulted another volume. The Fletcher family records include a map of their property holdings along Willow Creek. If Anna placed the statue in the deepest pool below the chapel ruins, we can pinpoint the exact location. She spread a hand-drawn map across the table, showing property boundaries and creek landmarks as they existed in 1954. Her finger traced the water's path until it stopped at a marked location about 2 miles downstream from the chapel site. "Here," she said. "This deep pool was created by the flood when the creek carved a new channel around a large boulder. According to the map's notations, it's approximately 4 feet deep at the center, exactly where you said you found the statue." William nodded with excitement. Anna's diary includes a detailed description of the placement ritual. She waded out to the boulder on a moonlit night, said prayers in both English and Gaelic, and committed the statue to the creek's protection until it was needed again. But how did she know I would find it? How could she predict 70 years into the future with such accuracy? "I think," Mrs. Henderson said thoughtfully, "Anna Sullivan experienced what some might call prophetic grace. Divine revelation that transcends normal human understanding of time. Whether you interpret that as religious experience, psychological trauma response, or something else entirely, the documented accuracy of her predictions is extraordinary." William showed Maria the diary's final entry. "I leave Cedar Falls tomorrow, but not with sadness. I have completed the work given to me. Patrick's statue rests where it belongs, waiting for the daughter of my blood who will need heaven's intervention to save her child. When Maria Bennett stands in Willow Creek holding her dying baby's blanket and praying for a miracle, the Blessed Mother will rise to meet her desperate faith with accumulated grace." "She even knew my married name," Maria breathed. The diary suggests Anna believed she was participating in what she called the communion of mothers, a spiritual connection that transcends death and time, linking women who face the ultimate fear of losing their children. She saw her tragedy as preparation. "For your blessing," Mrs. Henderson closed the diary gently. "Maria, what will you do with this knowledge?" Maria thought of David's struggle to accept even the basic facts of Samuel's recovery, of Ruth's quiet faith that needed no dramatic revelations, of Father Benedict's careful approach to claims of the miraculous. "I think I need to share this with my family, and then with Father Benedict. If Anna Sullivan received genuine revelations about my life, the church should know about it." "And the statue?" Maria looked toward the library's tall windows, where afternoon sunlight streamed through glass that had witnessed decades of discoveries like this one. "The statue belongs with Samuel. Anna placed it in Willow Creek for him specifically, but this diary, this should be preserved and studied. Other families might find comfort in Anna's belief that love persists across generations, that prayers offered in grief can become blessings for people not yet born." William gathered the photocopied pages they'd prepared. "I'll work with Mrs. Henderson to ensure the diary receives proper historical documentation. This kind of prophetic accuracy is unprecedented in local records." Walking to her car, Maria felt the weight of inherited purpose. Anna Sullivan had transformed personal tragedy into generational blessing, had somehow seen across 7 decades to prepare protection for a great-granddaughter she would never meet. The responsibility was both humbling and empowering. To honor Anna's sacrifice by living worthy of the miracle that had saved Samuel's life. Tonight she would share these discoveries with David and Ruth, would help them understand that their family story was part of a much larger tapestry of faith, loss, and redemption that connected them to something greater than themselves. And tomorrow, She would begin the process of deciding how to share Anna Sullivan's remarkable story with a world that desperately needed examples of hope, persisting across impossible circumstances. Father Benedict read Anna Sullivan's diary entries twice before setting the photocopied pages on his desk with the reverence reserved for sacred texts. The afternoon light filtering through his office windows illuminated dust motes that danced, like tiny spirits around the remarkable documents Maria had brought him. In 40 years of ministry, I have never encountered prophetic documentation this detailed or this verifiable, he said finally. The specificity of Anna's visions, combined with the genealogical evidence and the timing of Samuel's healing, presents a compelling case for divine revelation. Maria sat across from him, holding the statue that had become the center of their family's transformed understanding of faith and providence. Father, what does the church do with cases like this? Officially, we investigate thoroughly, seeking natural explanations before considering supernatural ones. We examine medical records, interview witnesses, and document everything with scientific rigor. The process can take years or even decades, and unofficially, Father Benedict smiled with the wisdom of someone who had witnessed the intersection of heaven and earth in countless quiet moments throughout his ministry. Unofficially, I believe God works through ordinary people in extraordinary ways, and that your family has been chosen to receive and share a remarkable blessing. David is still struggling with all of this. He wants to believe, but his engineering background demands logical explanations for everything. Faith and reason aren't enemies, Maria. Some of history's greatest scientists were deeply religious men who saw their discoveries as revelations of divine order. Perhaps David needs to understand that accepting mystery doesn't require abandoning logic. It simply means acknowledging that human logic has boundaries. Father Benedict stood and moved to his bookshelf, retrieving a worn leather volume. This is a collection of documented miracles from church history. What strikes me about Anna Sullivan's story is how it fits a pattern we see repeatedly: suffering transformed into blessing through faith that persists across time. He opened the book to a page marked with a faded ribbon. Saint Monica prayed for 30 years for her son Augustine's conversion. She died before seeing the full answer to her prayers, but Augustine became one of the church's greatest saints. Anna Sullivan prayed for 2 years for protection she couldn't give her own children, and 70 years later, those prayers saved Samuel's life. So you think I should share this story publicly? I think you should follow your conscience and trust that the same providence that brought the statue to you will guide you in how to share its significance with others. That evening, Maria found David in Samuel's nursery, assembling a new bookshelf that would hold the growing collection of children's books they'd been accumulating since Samuel's recovery. Their son slept peacefully in his crib, his healthy color and steady breathing a daily reminder of how dramatically their lives had changed. Father Benedict thinks Anna's diary represents authentic prophetic revelation, Maria said, settling into the rocking chair where she'd spent so many anxious nights during Samuel's illness. David's hands stilled on the bookshelf assembly. What does that mean exactly? It means the church believes Anna Sullivan received genuine divine visions about our family's future. It means Samuel's healing might be considered an official miracle. And what would that involve? Medical documentation, formal investigation, testimony from everyone involved. If the church confirms it as authentic, the story could become part of official Catholic teaching about answered prayer across generations. David sat back on his heels, studying the statue that watched over their son's sleep. Maria, 3 weeks ago, I was a skeptical engineer who trusted in medicine and rational explanations. Now, I'm being asked to accept that my great-grandmother-in-law received prophetic visions that led to my son's miraculous healing. It's a lot to process, I know. But David, look at Samuel. Look at how healthy he is, how he's exceeded every developmental milestone since his recovery. Look at the peace that seems to surround him whenever the statue is near. Whether we understand it or not, Something extraordinary happened to our family. Ruth appeared in the doorway, carrying the tea service she'd prepared for their evening conversations since Samuel's recovery. "May I join you?" They gathered around the small table David had built when they'd first moved into the house, sharing chamomile tea and the comfortable silence of a family learning to live with miracle as part of their daily reality. "Ruth, what do you think about sharing Anna's story with the community?" Maria asked. "I think secrets have a way of revealing themselves when the time is right," Ruth replied. "Mrs. Henderson has already mentioned the diary discovery to several people at the library. William Porter is documenting everything for the Historical Society. Father Benedict will likely share appropriate details with the diocese. The story wants to be told." David considered this, and what happens when reporters start calling, when people drive here hoping for their own miracles, when our quiet life becomes a public spectacle. Then we handle it with the same faith that brought us through Samuel's illness, Maria said. "We trust that if God wanted this story kept private, he wouldn't have made the connection so obvious and the documentation so complete." Ruth nodded with approval. Anna Sullivan lost everything, but used her remaining years to create blessing for people she would never meet. The least we can do is honor her sacrifice by sharing the hope her story represents. Over the following days, Maria found herself preparing for a decision that felt both inevitable and overwhelming. Samuel continued to thrive, his development exceeding every expectation, and his presence bringing unexpected peace to everyone who held him. Neighbors commented on his unusual alertness and contentment. Dr. Harrison marveled at growth charts that showed acceleration in every category of infant development. The statue had become a natural part of their family routine. Samuel's eyes tracked to it each morning when he woke, and his evening fussiness disappeared the moment he could see its familiar form on his dresser. David had stopped questioning these observations and had begun including the statue's presence in his mental list of factors contributing to Samuel's well-being. "Maria," he said one evening as they prepared for bed, "I've been thinking about the public aspect of this story. And if Anna Sullivan's prayers saved our son's life, and if her story could bring hope to other families facing similar crises, then maybe we have an obligation to share it." Maria felt a surge of gratitude for David's evolving faith. "You really believe that?" "I believe our son is alive and healthy because of something that transcends medical explanation. I believe your great-grandmother received authentic visions about our family's future, and I believe that kind of hope is too precious to keep to ourselves." The next morning, Maria called Father Benedict to schedule a meeting about sharing Anna Sullivan's story with the broader community. As she made the appointment, Samuel cooed contentedly from his bouncy seat, his bright eyes fixed on the statue that had watched over his family for 3 generations and would continue its silent guardianship for generations yet to come. Outside, the oak tree's branches moved in a gentle breeze that seemed to carry whispers of approval from all the mothers who had ever prayed desperately for their children's lives, adding their voices to the communion of love that transcends time and death. St. Catherine's Church had never held so many people for a regular Sunday service. Word of Maria's planned testimony had spread through Cedar Falls with the quiet efficiency of small-town communication, drawing not only the usual congregation, but families from surrounding communities who had heard fragments of Samuel's remarkable recovery story. Maria sat in the front pew with David and Ruth, Samuel sleeping peacefully in her arms, despite the unusual crowd and energy in the sanctuary. The Virgin Mary statue rested in a place of honor beside the altar, where Father Benedict had positioned it after morning prayers. Anna Sullivan's diary, open to the page describing her prophetic visions, lay on the lectern, awaiting Maria's testimony. "Are you ready for this?" David whispered, his hand finding Maria's free one. "I think Anna Sullivan prepared me for this 70 years ago," Maria replied, drawing strength from the documented faith of a woman who had transformed personal tragedy into generational blessing. Father Benedict's homily had focused on the mysterious ways divine providence works across time, preparing the congregation for testimony that challenged conventional understanding of prayer, healing, and answered faith. His words created a bridge between skepticism and wonder, inviting listeners to consider possibilities beyond their usual frameworks. As I call Maria Bennett forward to share her family's experience, Father Benedict concluded, "I ask that you listen with hearts open to mystery and minds willing to consider that God's love operates on timescales we cannot fully comprehend." Maria rose and walked to the lectern, carrying Samuel and the weight of representing not only her own family's experience, but Anna Sullivan's extraordinary faith legacy. The congregation settled into attentive silence as she adjusted the microphone and looked out at faces ranging from hopeful curiosity to obvious skepticism. "3 weeks ago, I was a mother watching her 3-month-old son die from an illness no doctor could explain or treat," she began, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was about to share. "Today, Samuel is not only healthy, but thriving beyond every medical expectation. What happened between those two realities is a story that connects our family to events that occurred in this community 70 years ago." She told them about that desperate night at Willow Creek, about finding the statue beneath the water and Samuel's impossible recovery. She shared the genealogical discoveries that revealed her connection to Anna Sullivan and the diary entries that had predicted her family's crisis with startling specificity. Anna Sullivan lost her husband and 2 children in the 1952 flood that destroyed the original St. Mary's Chapel, Maria continued, holding up the photocopied diary pages. In her grief, she received visions of a great-granddaughter she would never meet, who would face the same terror of losing a child, but would receive the protection Anna couldn't provide for her own family. A murmur rippled through the congregation as Maria read selected diary entries aloud. The specificity of Anna's predictions, Maria's name, birth year, career as a pediatric nurse, and even the details of Samuel's illness and recovery created a documented chain of prophetic accuracy that was difficult to dismiss as coincidence. "Anna placed this statue in Willow Creek deliberately," Maria explained, gesturing toward the altar where the Virgin Mary's marble face seemed to glow in the morning light. "She wrapped it in protective cloth, weighted it with stones, and committed it to the water's safekeeping until the moment I would need it most. For 70 years, it waited in the exact spot where my desperation would lead me to discover it." David stood and joined Maria at the lectern, his presence representing the transformation from skepticism to acceptance that many in the congregation were experiencing themselves. "I'm an engineer," David said simply. "I've spent my career solving problems through logic, analysis, and proven methods. When Samuel got sick, I trusted medicine and research and rational approaches to treatment. When those failed, I was prepared to lose my son." His voice grew stronger as he continued. "I cannot explain through any scientific framework how a marble statue could facilitate healing, but I can document that Samuel's recovery began the exact night Maria found this statue, and that his health has exceeded every medical expectation since then. I can verify the historical research that connects this statue to Maria's family across 3 generations, and I can testify that some blessings transcend our ability to understand them." Ruth joined them at the front of the church, her presence representing the continuity of faith across generations. "I've lived long enough to see that God works through ordinary people in extraordinary ways," she said. Anna Sullivan transformed her tragedy into blessing for people she would never meet. Maria and David are sharing their experience so that other families might find hope in their darkest moments. This is how faith moves through time, from one generation's prayers to another generation's miracles. The congregation sat in profound silence as the implications settled over them. Father Benedict approached the lectern, placing his hands on the diary that had documented Anna Sullivan's remarkable prophecies. "The Church will investigate these claims with appropriate rigor," he announced. "But regardless of official determination, we have witnessed something extraordinary today, evidence that prayer transcends time, that love persists across generations, and that God's providence operates on scales we can barely imagine." The silence that followed Father Benedict's words lasted only moments before Mrs. Patterson, whose own grandson had survived leukemia the previous year, stood in her pew and began to speak. "I want to share something," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the hushed sanctuary. "When little Danny was diagnosed, I found myself praying to ancestors I'd never met, asking for intercession from grandmothers who had lost children to diseases that are treatable now. I never told anyone, but I felt their presence during his chemotherapy treatments." Her testimony opened a floodgate of similar experiences. One by one, members of the congregation stood to share their own stories of unexplained healing, answered prayers that had crossed generations, and moments when the boundary between earthly and divine had seemed surprisingly thin. Martin Webb, the town's retired pharmacist, told of his daughter's recovery from a car accident that doctors said should have been fatal. The nurse who stayed with her all night said she heard singing in the room, old hymns in a language she didn't recognize. "My daughter woke up the next morning with injuries that had healed overnight." Sarah Collins shared how her infertility had ended after she'd visited her great-grandmother's grave and found a forgotten prayer card tucked into the headstone. "I was pregnant within 2 months, after 5 years of failed treatments." The prayer card was dated 1923 and asked specifically for blessing on future generations of women. Dr. Harrison, who had observed Samuel's impossible recovery firsthand, stood near the back of the church. "As a physician, I've learned to distinguish between medical miracles, rare but explainable recoveries, and events that transcend medical understanding entirely. Samuel Bennett's case falls into the latter category. His healing was instantaneous, complete, and without precedent in my 40 years of practice." The testimonies continued as families shared experiences they had never spoken of publicly, stories of protection that seemed to come from beyond the grave, healing that arrived through prayer chains stretching across decades. What emerged was a picture of faith operating as a living force that connected generations through bonds stronger than death. Father Benedict watched with growing amazement as his congregation transformed before his eyes. These were practical. Farming families, small business owners, and working people who typically kept their deepest spiritual experiences private. But Maria's courage in sharing Anna Sullivan's story had created permission for others to acknowledge the mysterious workings of providence in their own lives. Young Jennifer Walsh, barely 18 and holding her newborn daughter, stood with tears streaming down her face. "My baby was born 6 weeks early with underdeveloped lungs. The doctors said she might not survive the night, but when I was praying in the NICU, I felt hands on my shoulders, gentle hands like my grandmother's used to be. She died when I was 10, but I knew it was her. My daughter's breathing improved within hours." The stories created a tapestry of faith that encompassed multiple generations, different denominations, and various expressions of the same fundamental belief that love transcends physical death and continues to protect and bless across impossible spans of time. David found himself deeply moved by testimonies that echoed his own reluctant journey from skepticism to acceptance. Engineering had taught him to value evidence, and the accumulating evidence suggested that reality included dimensions his profession had never acknowledged. When the sharing finally subsided, Father Benedict invited the congregation to join hands for a prayer of thanksgiving. The circle formed spontaneously, including people who had never spoken to each other before, but now shared the bond of having witnessed something extraordinary together. Loving God, Father Benedict prayed. "We thank you for Anna Sullivan's faithful prayers that reached across 70 years to save Samuel Bennett's life. We thank you for the reminder that our prayers for future generations have power beyond our understanding. And we thank you for the courage to speak these mysteries aloud, knowing that hope shared becomes hope multiplied." The prayer concluded with a spontaneous chorus of "Amazing Grace," sung in voices that carried the full weight of personal experience with grace that was indeed amazing. Maria stood at the front of the church holding Samuel, who remained peacefully alert throughout the entire service, as if understanding his role as the focal point of generational blessing. As the congregation began to disperse, many families approached Maria and David to share more personal details of their own experiences. The Hendersons told of their son's recovery from a brain tumor after they'd found a hidden family Bible with prayer requests dating back to the 1800s. The Kowalskis described how their farm had been saved from bankruptcy through a series of coincidences that began after cleaning their grandmother's attic and discovering her handwritten prayers for future generations' prosperity. Local news reporters, who had arrived expecting to document a small-town curiosity, found themselves recording testimony that challenged their assumptions about the boundaries between faith and fact. Channel 8's veteran reporter Linda Morrison approached Maria as the crowd thinned. "Mrs. Bennett, I came here expecting to write a human interest piece about a family's recovery from illness. Instead, I've documented what appears to be evidence of intergenerational prayer efficacy. How do you want this story to be told?" Maria looked toward the altar where the Virgin Mary statue continued its silent vigil. "Tell it truthfully. Anna Sullivan's faith deserves to be honored, and other families deserve to know that prayers offered in love never truly end. They echo forward through time until they find the hearts that need them most." Dr. Harrison joined their conversation, his medical perspective adding weight to the day's extraordinary events. "I'll be happy to provide documentation of Samuel's case to any medical professionals who want to study it. The recovery timeline and health improvements are unlike anything in current literature." Father Benedict approached carrying Anna Sullivan's diary, which had become the afternoon's most requested document. "Maria, I believe this diary should be preserved in the diocesan archives, but only with your family's permission. It represents remarkable evidence of prophetic revelation." "Yes," Maria agreed immediately. "Anna's words don't belong to just our family. They belong to anyone who needs hope that their prayers matter across generations." Ruth, who had spent the afternoon quietly observing the community's response, offered her own reflection. "Today felt like watching seeds that Anna planted 70 years ago finally bloom. She trusted that her faith would reach beyond her own understanding, and today we saw exactly how far that trust can carry." As the last families filed out of the sanctuary, Maria found herself alone with David and Samuel at the altar. The statue seemed to glow in the late afternoon light, streaming through the stained glass windows, its marble face holding the same serene expression that had greeted Anna Sullivan's desperate prayers 7 decades earlier. "Are you ready for what comes next?" David asked, gathering the flowers and cards that parishioners had left around the statue. "I think Anna prepared me for whatever comes next," Maria replied, adjusting Samuel's blanket as he dozed peacefully. "In her arms, she showed me that some responsibilities are inherited across generations and that sharing hope is always worth whatever challenges it brings." They walked home through streets where neighbors waved with new understanding of the miracle that had occurred in their community. Samuel's impossible recovery had become more than a medical curiosity. It had become evidence that faith operates on timescales beyond human comprehension, connecting hearts across decades through bonds of love that transcend physical death. That evening, as Maria tucked Samuel into his crib beneath the watchful presence of the statue that had saved his life, She whispered a prayer of gratitude to Anna Sullivan, great-grandmother, prophet, and faithful intercessor whose love had reached across 70 years to preserve the life of a child she would never meet, but whose welfare she had treasured in her heart until her final breath. 6 months later, Maria stood at the edge of Willow Creek, watching David and his construction crew put the finishing touches on the memorial chapel that would honor Anna Sullivan and the families lost in the 1952 flood. The simple stone structure rose from the same foundation stones where the original St. Mary's Chapel had stood, its clean lines and tall windows designed to welcome both sunlight and the faithful who came seeking their own encounters with grace. Samuel, now 11 months old and walking earlier than any developmental chart predicted, toddled between the workers with the fearless curiosity of a child who had never known a day of illness since his miraculous recovery. His bright eyes and infectious laughter had made him the unofficial mascot of the construction project, and several workers claimed his presence brought them unexpected peace during their labor. The bronze plaque arrived this morning, David called from the chapel's entrance, where he was supervising the installation of the memorial that would tell Anna Sullivan's story to future generations. The inscription read simply, "In memory of Anna Sullivan Fletcher, 1898-1991, who transformed personal tragedy into generational blessing through faithful prayer. Her visions of protection for children yet unborn were fulfilled in God's perfect timing." Below Anna's dedication, additional plaques honored the 14 souls lost in the 1952 flood, their names carved in stone that would weather centuries of seasons while preserving the memory of lives cut short but not forgotten. The central plaque bore Anna's own words from her diary, "For all the babies yet to come, that they might know God's protection where mine could not reach." Ruth approached from the parking area where she had been directing the afternoon's steady stream of visitors. Word of Samuel's healing and Anna Sullivan's prophetic legacy had spread far beyond Cedar Falls, drawing families from across the region who came seeking their own miracles or simply hoping to witness a place where heaven had touched earth in documented, verifiable ways. "The Peterson family from Denver just left," Ruth reported. "Their little girl has leukemia and they wanted to pray at the spot where Samuel was healed. I gave them copies of Anna's diary excerpts and told them about the prayer circle that meets here every Tuesday evening. The weekly prayer gatherings had begun spontaneously after Samuel's story became public. Families dealing with childhood illness, infertility, and other seemingly impossible challenges gathered at the creek each week to add their voices to the communion of faith that Anna Sullivan had initiated 7 decades earlier. Dr. Harrison, despite his medical training's emphasis on evidence-based treatment, had begun referring families to the prayer circle as a complement to conventional therapy. Maria walked to the chapel's altar, where the Virgin Mary statue had been permanently installed in a custom niche that allowed natural light to illuminate its serene features throughout the day. Dozens of small offerings surrounded the statue, photographs of sick children, handwritten prayer requests, flowers left by families seeking or celebrating answered prayers. "Maria, there's someone here to see you," Father Benedict called from the chapel entrance. Behind him stood an elderly woman leaning on a walking cane, her silver hair neatly pinned and her eyes bright with intelligence and purpose. "I'm Catherine Fletcher," the woman said, approaching with careful but determined steps. "Anna Sullivan was my grandmother." Maria's breath caught. Anna's granddaughter, her youngest granddaughter actually, born to the daughter Anna had after losing her children in the flood. "I've driven here from Kansas City because I needed to see the place where grandmother's prayers were finally answered." Catherine settled onto the chapel's front bench, her movements showing the careful deliberation of 91 years. "Grandmother died when I was 25, but I remember her stories about the statue and the visions. Our family always wondered if she'd experienced some kind of breakdown after the flood, if the dreams and prophecies were symptoms of trauma rather than genuine revelation. And now I see my grandmother was exactly what she claimed to be, a prophet who received authentic visions of God's plan for your family. Catherine's voice carried the authority of someone who had spent 9 decades observing the mysterious ways providence worked through ordinary lives. She never doubted that her prayers would be answered, even when the rest of us thought she was clinging to impossible hope. Samuel toddled over to Catherine, drawn by some invisible magnetism that had marked all his interactions since the healing. She lifted him onto her lap, with the practiced ease of someone who had raised children and grandchildren, and Samuel immediately settled against her with the contentment he showed only in the presence of the statue or other sources of inexplicable peace. "He has her eyes," Catherine observed, studying Samuel's face with recognition that transcended rational explanation. "Grandmother always said the child who would be saved would carry the family resemblance across all the generations between them. You see Anna in Samuel? I see the continuation of her faith. Grandmother believed that love persists across time, that prayers offered in desperate faith never truly end, but echo forward until they find the hearts that need them most. Samuel represents the fulfillment of that belief." As the afternoon progressed, Catherine shared family stories that had never been written down. Anna's late-life visions of children she would never meet, her absolute certainty that the statue would surface when needed, her detailed descriptions of the woman who would find it and the baby who would be saved. The stories filled gaps in the documentary evidence and provided intimate details that transformed Anna from historical figure to beloved great-great-grandmother, whose love had reached across impossible spans of time. "Grandmother made me promise to find your family if her prophecies ever came true," Catherine concluded. "She said I would know when the time was right, and that I should bring this to the child who was saved." She opened a small velvet box, revealing a gold locket that had belonged to Anna Sullivan. Inside were 2 tiny photographs, one of Patrick Sullivan and another of the 2 children lost in the flood. On the opposite side, Anna had inscribed a simple message: "For Samuel, who carries our prayers into the future." Maria's hands trembled as she accepted the locket. She knew his name. She knew everything about him. His name, his birth month, even the fact that he would walk early and have an unusual gift for bringing peace to troubled hearts. Catherine gestured toward the construction workers, several of whom had paused their labor to watch Samuel's interactions with the chapel's visitors. Grandmother said he would be marked by the miracle, that people would sense something special about him without understanding exactly what they were experiencing. As sunset approached, the daily gathering began to form around the memorial chapel. Families from across the region had made Tuesday evening pilgrimage a regular part of their lives, coming to pray in the place where Anna Sullivan's faith had been vindicated and Samuel Bennett's life had been saved. The prayer circle included Catholics and Protestants, believers and skeptics who had been moved by evidence of grace operating beyond denominational boundaries. Maria and David joined the circle, Samuel content in his father's arms as voices rose, in prayers that connected contemporary needs to the faithful intercession that had echoed through 7 decades. The prayers were simple and direct, requests for healing, protection, guidance, and the strength to trust in providence, even when understanding remained elusive. "Loving God," Maria prayed aloud, "we thank you for Anna Sullivan's faithful example, and for the reminder that our prayers for future generations have power beyond our comprehension. Help us to trust in your timing, to offer our love forward across time, and to believe that no faithful prayer is ever truly lost." As the prayer circle concluded and families began to leave, Maria lingered beside the statue that had saved her son's life and connected her to a legacy of faith she had never known existed. Samuel reached for the Virgin Mary's marble hand with the recognition of someone greeting an old friend, and Maria understood that some relationships transcend the boundaries of time and physical existence. walking home through streets that had become pilgrimage routes for families seeking their own miracles. Maria reflected on how completely their lives had been transformed by events that began with desperate prayer and a marble statue emerging from creek water. Samuel's healing had become more than medical miracle. It had become evidence that love persists across generations, that faith operates on timescales beyond human understanding, and that some prayers are answered not in our timing, but in God's perfect moment. The oak tree in their front yard had grown fuller over the months since Samuel's recovery, its branches now strong enough to support the swing David had finally installed. As they approached their home, Samuel pointed eagerly toward the tree where he spent happy hours each day, secure in the knowledge that he was surrounded by protection, both seen and unseen. That night, as Maria tucked Samuel into his crib beneath the gentle glow of his nightlight, she whispered the prayer that had become their family's evening tradition. "Thank you, Anna Sullivan, for loving children you would never meet enough to pray across 70 years for their protection. Help us to love future generations with the same faithful hope, trusting that our prayers today will become someone else's miracle tomorrow." Samuel cooed contentedly, his bright eyes tracking to the window where moonlight illuminated the path between their home and Willow Creek, where sacred waters continued their patient flow toward whatever families might need their own encounter, with grace echoing forward through time.